Happy Mother's Day. How many moms, your gift for Mother's Day was that you don't have to be around your kids? How is that a thing? It's like, I know my wife was one. It's like Labor Day, you don't work. Mother's Day, you don't have to be a mom. That's awesome. Now, I feel like I lucked out, and I have such awesome perspective when it comes to Mother's Day, just because my mom is the greatest mom, and she's a great Nana. My mother-in-law is a fantastic mom and an amazing Mimi. Hey, thanks, bud. Look at that. And then, of course, my wife is the best mom that I know and loves our kids so very well, and I learn constant lessons from the way that she's just so incredibly patient. I think that is the one word that I just, when I see moms with their kids, I'm like, man, there's a patience. Yes, I know we all get pushed to our limits, but there's still this love that permeates even the toughest of times. And so at Shoreline, we want to celebrate that and say thanks, moms, because we know that all that it takes. I didn't grow up. Very Freudian pause there. Fishing. I didn't grow up fishing. I don't have anything against fishing. I just didn't grow up doing it, didn't know anything about it. And so, of course, my oldest son has this weird, natural draw to fishing. He loves it. He wants to do it. And so for me, I'm trying to balance his tension because on one hand, I want to be vulnerable with him and say, hey, man, this isn't really my area of expertise. We can do this journey together. We can learn together. But on the other side, I still want him to see me as the man of the house, right? I don't want my son tying my hooks on for me. There's just emasculating. So my in-laws, my father-in-law has been fishing his entire life. His hands are 9-inch calluses. This is actually not hyperbole. He wears a size 16 ring, which is like an anklet for most people, right? So anyway, we go to his house. Now they live in Destin. They used to be in Navarre, and they had this big old dock. And so my kids are going to go fish off the end of the dock, and I'm just praying that my son doesn't catch anything, because then I'll have to deal with it. Sure enough, first cast, he hooks up to a fish and reels it in, and he's handing it to me, and I was like, my experience with fish is after they've been fashioned into sticks and they're in the freezer section of Walmart, that's how I know fishing. But at the same time, I got to man up inside of this, and so I put pretty much a down comforter over my hand so I don't even accidentally touch this thing. And let me be clear, I'm not afraid of the fish, all right? Let me just throw that out there. Here's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of my natural reaction if, God forbid, that thing flails when I'm trying to take the hook out. Because you can't control that, right? If it flails, that's fight or flight. That's just an instinct. And if I squeal for some reason when I'm taking the hook out, you think that kid's ever listening to me again? No, I'll be like, go to bed. He'll be like, you go to bed. I'm like, okay, right. He'll be bullying me for money. And I can't have that on my conscience. So I try to man up, go double comforter on this thing, and I put it in, and I grab the hook, and after just a quick 30 minutes, somehow I've got this hook out. I'm just so proud of myself. I'm just sending texts to all my high school bullies that just look at me now type of thing. All right, so then I'm just hoping that's the end of the day and we'll go on with life lessons. Very next cast, Gage hooks up to a different one. He reels it in, and I'm like, bring me the comforter. And he gives it to me, and this time the fish swallowed the hook. And, as emasculating as it was, I realized this is above my pay grade. So I call my father-in-law over, and it's just, I'm averting eye contact because I don't need that in my life. And he's just so disappointed in his daughter's choice of a life partner. So I'm averting eye, just submission and shame, and, I hand this thing over, and so in his huge man hands, he grabs the fish, and he goes, y'all are going to want to look away. And before I had time to process anything, before my kids had time to process anything or look away, he grabs his fish and with his bare hands snaps it in two and then gets the hook out and then throws the two halves in the water. And I was like, oh. And to my kids, I was like, are you guys okay? And they're like, yeah. I was like, oh, good, yeah. Oh, me too. So I'm just going to go inside and get some fresh air, And we're in week 3 of this series called Hooked Up. And my guess is that every one of us has a hooked up story, right? Maybe your story is that you've hooked up with someone and there's a story, a response, a feeling because of that. Maybe you were with somebody who hooked up with somebody else and you carry something because of that. Maybe it's not even relational. Maybe it's that somebody was like, hey, in this job, in this work, I've got the hookup for you, like I'll hook you up. And then something happened because of that. Everybody has a story where they were connected. They were hooked up in some way, shape, or form. And I'm betting that the scars that resulted from those situations span the spectrum. Maybe some of you guys, because of your hookup stories, it was just a hook through the lip. And you got away relatively unscathed. And then there's others of you who feel like because of your hookup story, you were torn in two and thrown back into the water. You know what hurts? It feels like the more we lean in, the more it's a good way to say that. The more we dare to love, it feels like the deeper the wounds get. It feels like you carry that with you. And I'm just betting, how many of our stories are, you loved somebody who didn't love you back. And you feel that, and you carry that. And how could they not love us? I mean, look at us, right? What's not to love here now? Come on. But it affected you. It affected your expectation of the next time. Maybe for you, your story is the 2 people that you trusted the most in the world. Your mom and your dad said, we can't make this work. We can't make marriage work. And all of a sudden, lives are separated and homes are separated. And then other adults are introduced into the relationships and you're like, what just happened? And the scar from that has affected your filter on everything. It's affected your own marriage. It's affected the fear that you have moving forward. You have this tempered excitement, thinking if this is the way that it ends, it probably will for me. Maybe, though, it's not in marriage, something that has hurt you just as deeply as somebody has said, hey, I've got the hookup inside of jobs, and then you have worked so hard, tirelessly, sacrificed everything, and then somebody took your ideas and they pawned it as their own. And they said they were going to hook you up, and then all of a sudden you just feel lost, like all of your work was for nothing. And they've wasted it. Feels like we live in a world where the more times we are hooked up to things, almost like the less we have faith in a good outcome for the next time. And what's that old saying, right? The old saying is hurt people hurt people. Every one of us, acting out of frustration or brokenness or hurt, every one of us has deeply emotionally wounded somebody else because of the filters that we've created, the scars that we have carried, be it a hook through the lip or be it torn in two. It affects the way that we treat other people. Now here's the good news. The good news is that Jesus cares about this. The good news is that God got involved in this. The good news, if you ever heard the term the gospel actually means the good news. The good news is that Jesus came to heal your wounds. Listen, this is not just like an idea or a concept, or this is not just, superficial or like hocus pocus. Practically, Jesus came here to earth and he experienced what we experienced. He endured and absorbed the pain of that experience, and he sacrificed himself on our behalf. We've said this before, but now, because of what Jesus did on the cross, we have access to the Holy Spirit, which means that we can talk to God at any time. But before what Jesus did on the cross, there were people called prophets. And God would speak through these people called prophets and say, would you communicate my word to the people? And so there was a prophet named Isaiah, and 740 years before Jesus, The prophet Isaiah said this, foretelling what would happen through Jesus. Isaiah 53:5. But he, Jesus, was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace, and let me explain that. When we sin, and here's what sin means. My brother gave me this definition. It's my favorite definition of sin. He said, sin is an inward dependence from God. I love that. Now, how does that manifest? Manifest in the things that we do, and the things that we say, and the things that we think. But ultimately, it's an inward independence from God. If there's this condition of sin that we have, it separates us from a good, a perfect, a holy God. We are separated from him. And so somebody has to pay the penalty for that. Like, there has to be justice. What is wronged has to be made right, right? And if we're going to experience peace with God, then somebody has to take that on. And so this is this foretelling of what happens. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, was upon Jesus, and by his wounds we are healed. So here's what that means. In other words, the wounding and suffering of Jesus, Jesus absorbed all of the payment and all of the suffering onto himself. Listen to that, because that's big time. He absorbed all the payment. He made it right. He made it so that there's justice, that the sin has been paid for, and he absorbed all of the suffering onto himself. And we think to ourselves, yeah, I get that, I understand that, and I've heard the story of the crucifixion, and that's super brutal, and however, that's different than what I've felt. That's a crazy physical pain, but Graham, mine's different. If you hear my story of my hooked up scar, it's emotional. It's relational. A lot of times we forget, because we just look at the end, the crucifixion of Jesus dying on the cross, we forget that Jesus' entire life was a sacrifice. That he actually experienced all that we have experienced. And we have hope because of his wounds. So today, we're going to look at two different scenarios that Jesus was in, two interactions, and we look at the hope that they give us moving forward. But first, there's a really important point about woundedness that we need to kind of flesh out here, or about being wounded. Well, this one day, Jesus goes to this little pool of water. And at this pool of water, people will gather there essentially to be healed. They believe that the water would heal them. And so if they're just in proximity to the pool of water, or if they submerge themselves, and they'll be healed. So Jesus goes to this pool of water, and he runs into this guy, and he has this conversation. And he goes, hey, how long have you been here? And the man tells Jesus, 38 years. Jesus goes, 38 years? And he goes, yep. So every day this guy had woken up, had his friends carry him to the pool. He sat there all day, probably submerging himself, sitting by it in proximity, and in his mind thinking that this will heal. And so then Jesus asks him what feels like a very inappropriate question. Jesus goes, do you really want to be healed? Do you really want to be healed? I mean, this guy's been coming to this pool for 38 years. Nothing's changed in every single day for 38 years, so it's a fair question, right? It's a fair question. It's saying, do you really want to be healed? And I'm going to ask you this today. It's a big question. The question is, are you ready to be healed? Are you ready to be healed? This guy knew nothing but the pain of his condition for 38 years. Think about that. Think about how long that is. And maybe it wasn't the most comfortable, but he knows that life. He knows when he gets up. He knows when his friends take him there. He has his talking points when somebody asks him about his condition. He knows what to say. He is at the very least accustomed and maybe even addicted to this lifestyle that's been going on for 30. You guys have heard story of people that are in prison for 40 or 50 years, and then they get out, and then they'll do something. They'll break the law intentionally to go back to prison. Because they go, yeah, I know it's prison, but I know that. It's at least comfortable. It's something that I've lived with, and I think that sometimes we carry on with things because we don't know how to carry on without those things. And it's what we know. And yeah, it's pain, but it's predictable pain. It's things that we're comfortable with. And our life just is revolving around the debilitating effects of our wounds. Listen, I want to remind you, we need to remind ourselves how good a life of healing can be. How good a life of healing can be. It's what Jesus came here to die for. Quote by C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis says that we are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. Like an ignorant child who goes on making mud pies in a slum because he has no idea what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. Question I want you to wrestle with today. Ask yourself, meditate on this, even have that conversation with God is, are you ready to be healed? Are you done just like revolving your life around the debilitating conditions of your wounds, your emotional wounds? Are you ready to move past that? Are you ready for your next relationship, you not bringing in the filter of the past hurts and fears that you've had? It takes a huge step, and Jesus says, you can be healed. I want to heal you. But there has to be this concerted effort by us to say, I want to move into that. I'm ready. I realize how good it can be, and I want to step into that. The first condition that we're going to look at, or at least the foundation to this scenario, is the word betrayal, which everybody here has felt. And betrayal, we're putting stabbed in the back, is what betrayal means, which I just think is such a gnarly phrase. The reason I think it's a gnarly phrase is because if you're going to get stabbed in the back, that means that you trusted somebody enough to put your guard down. You know? You finally trusted them enough to put their guard down, and then they did that to you. I was a swimmer growing up, and if you ever see me do anything athletic, that shouldn't surprise you. But when I was 9 years old, first year on this swim team, there's coach was there, and for lack of better words, he was my friend. Really good encourager, and he was everywhere. He was a tuba instructor and at the school, so I just saw him all the time. And he's always super nice, and felt kind of cool to say, you got a friend, you know, who's older. And one day we'd all gone bowling, and we were driving back, and this guy says to me as we're driving back home, he goes, hey, Graham, no matter what you ever find out about me, promise me that you'll love me. And I was like, okay, you know. And then 2 days later, he was arrested and charged with 15 accounts of child molestation. And so nothing had ever physically happened to me, but, and I remember, like, I'd called him my friend, you know, and he was my friend. And I'd finally put my guard down and been willing to trust somebody. And I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, and I was watching the newscast, and they just kept calling him a predator, a predator, a predator. And like I had like ringing in my ears, you know? Remember the very first time that you felt betrayal for that? Where like, can I even trust again? You know? And then so every time somebody was kind to me from then on, what was that thought, right? How can I trust this? Every time somebody fashioned themselves in a position of authority, I was like, how can I trust this? It deeply affected me. I felt so betrayed that I didn't know how to continue on. And we think to ourselves, we're the only ones that have experienced this. There's no way that God of the universe has experienced betrayal. And we need to know this morning that he has experienced that. And this story shows that. Matthew 26, remember that Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John are the accounts, are four different people's accounts of Jesus' time here on earth. So we're in chapter 26 of Matthew's account. Verse 3, then the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas. and they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or there may be a riot among the people. So we already have the religious who are trying to get rid of Jesus. And we're about to find out that one of Jesus' inner circle is willing to oblige them on this. Verse 14, then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went over to the chief priests and asks, what are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you? In other gospel accounts and other eyewitness accounts, they said that the chief priests were elated. They couldn't believe it. They were trying to plot, how can we possibly get to Jesus? And one of the inner circle, one of the ones who's with him, one of the ones who has real access to him, comes up and goes, I'll do it. I'll do it. And what's his cost? What's his motive? Money. So they actually count out 30 pieces of silver, which in that time was the price of a slave. And, Judas pockets this money, and now a few days later, they're having this Passover meal, and they're in the upper room, and Judas is actually very close to Jesus in the seating arrangement, okay? And look what happens, verse 20. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. And Judas just full body puckers, right? And the response by the other 11, they were very sad and began to say to him one after the other, surely you don't mean me, Lord, verbally, right? They're all answering. It's like exit row of an airplane. You got to say something. He's like, surely not me, right? Matthew, surely not me. And James, surely not me. Peter, surely not me. I'm sure only one was silent. Verse 23, Jesus replied, the one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. Now, all of them have been dipping into the bowl. For Middle Eastern meals, the way that it's served is by these big family-style bowls, and you take your bread and you dip in the meal. And so it was saying one of you guys who's been with me, but it means more than that. It means somebody that I've shared my life with, somebody that I've shared my journey with, somebody that I've let my guard down around, somebody that we've experienced life together. You know what I love about this is, in this, Jesus is essentially, he's playing to Judas's humanity inside of this. It's almost a pleading. He's not coming with anger. He knows Judas is going to betray him. And it's not anger, it's not, wrath or vitriol. What instead it is just saying, Judas, come on. Remember us. Remember who we are. Verse 24, the Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born. Judas, come on. Listen, dude, what you are doing right here is so bad. The eternal consequences are so bad, man. Stop. It's still a pleading. Knowing what's going to happen, he is still reaching out emotionally, trying to connect. And who can do that? I don't know if I could. But somebody who's willing to absorb the pain of their own betrayal is able to do that. Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, surely you don't mean me, Rabbi, which is pretty bold, by the way. And notice the way he distances himself. Everybody else calls him Lord, and Judas calls him Rabbi. And Jesus answered, you have said so. And so Judas leaves, and now the disciples, everybody goes with Jesus, and they're going to the Garden of Gethsemane. And verse 47, there in the garden, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal. Can't you just see Matthew writing this? Couldn't even write Judas' name. He's so mad at him, right? And the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. Judas knew that Jesus loved him so much that though Jesus knew he was going to betray him, he would allow him to get close enough and plant this kiss on him, right? The Judas kiss. That's how much confidence that Judas has in Jesus' love for him despite the betrayal. And he still betrays him. And I want to stop there and just ask you, you ever had someone do that to you? ever had someone that you let so close in and they just stabbed you in the back? And it felt like they got close enough to plant the kiss, close enough into you, and then, it's supposed to be till death do us part. Like, what happened to that? And at what cost, right? For Judas, it's 30 pieces of silver. What cost for that person? What do they get? Maybe you have made that decision. Maybe you have done that. What was the payoff ultimately? What was the cost of that action? What was the cost of that compromise? So this is what Jesus is experiencing here. And look at his response. Jesus replied, "Do what you came for, friend." Still calls him a friend, even in the midst of the act of betrayal, is still saying to him, I remember the times that we had, still recognizes that Judas is a child of God, still pleads with him inside, and still something I wouldn't be able to do, but something that Jesus can do from accessing the supernatural forgiveness. Here's what I want to remind you. Here's what I wrote. Jesus is also taking the pain for the people betraying you. People stabbing you in the back. The people causing you pain. He suffered already, so you don't have to carry that anymore. He served justice in his own suffering, so you don't have to hold on to the disappointment and the brokenness of what somebody did to you. Now, while all this is going on with Judas, Peter is betraying him in a different way. And the emotion that we're pulling out of this is denial. And denial is when you feel deserted in the moment of need, right? So right after the supper, they're walking to the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus tells them this. This very night you will all fall away on account of me, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. He's saying, you guys are all going to desert me. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Here's why that's interesting. He's saying, yes, you guys are all going to desert me, but once I rise from the dead, I'm going to Galilee by myself to gather you to myself. And he's saying, you're going to desert me, but I've already forgiven you for that. And so Peter replies, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will, which is awesome, right? His protest of loyalty starts with, well, first of all, Jesus, you're wrong. But not only are you wrong, these other jabronis might screw it up, but I'm better than they are. I'm the man. I'm actually the real loyal one. I'm better. Truly I tell you, Jesus answered, this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the other disciples said the same. So, what happens next is Jesus goes off to pray, and he says to Peter, he goes, hey, I want you to pray. Would you stay here and pray? This is the night before he's going to be crucified. He knows how much attack he's under, and he says, please pray for me. Jesus goes off to pray, and when he comes back, Peter's asleep. And so Jesus is thinking, hey, you said you're going to die for me, but you wouldn't, even stay awake for me. And you know what I thought about for this? A lot of times when we think of sacrifice, this is just kind of a recalibrating moment. We think, what does it look like to sacrifice for God? What does it look like to show him that we're really serious about this? I'll tell you what it would take. If somebody had me at gunpoint and they said, are you a Christian? Then maybe you've fantasized, I'll say yes. And even if it costs my life, I would look down the barrel of a gun and I would declare my loyalty to God. Very rarely does that opportunity present itself. So here's what I want to ask. Or say, you may be willing to die for Jesus, but are you willing to live for him? Are you willing to live for him? Very, very rarely are we in a position where we give our actual lives for God. But every single day, we have the opportunity to choose to love beyond ourselves. Every day, we get to choose whether or not the filters of our past hurt and shame are going to affect the way that we extend forgiveness and love to other people. Yeah, maybe we say we're willing to die, but in that moment, are we really willing to lean into how God would ask us to live? So, in that moment, the guards come in, okay, after Peter had fallen asleep, guards come in and they start to arrest Jesus. Actually, Peter grabs a sword, cuts off one of the guards' ears, just Van Goghs him, right? Holyfields him. And Jesus is like, no, dude, we don't need any of that here, and actually heals the guard's ear back. And then, as they're leading Jesus off in chains because he's going to go to trial at the high priest's place, the rest of the disciples scatter, except for Peter and John. They are following closely, not closely, maybe at a distance behind, and John actually knows the high priest's family. And so John actually gets to go into the trial, and Peter, he kind of gets Peter in through the velvet ropes a little bit, and Peter gets to be there in the courtyard with the servants and the soldiers. So that's how he kind of gets access to all that. All right. So verse 69, now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. You were also with Jesus of Galilee, she said, but he denied it before them all. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Then he went out to the gateway where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, this fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth. He denied it again with an oath. I don't know the man. Wouldn't even say his name. After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away, because most of Jesus' disciples would have Galilean accents. Then he began to call down curses. And what does that mean? That just is like, it's where you ask God to do bad things to you if you're lying, right? That if I'm lying, I'm dying type of thing. And he swore to them, I don't know the man. And then you can just see this moment where he's just declined into this ball of self-preservation. And then in that moment, once he says that, when he's completely lost himself, it says immediately a rooster crowed. And in John's account of what happens, it says that Jesus is inside in the trial, and he looks out the door in that moment into the courtyard, and he locks eyes with Peter. And that Peter sees the sorrow of the man who's about to go and be beaten, who's about to have the crown of thorns, who's about to give everything, and realizes in that moment he completely denied even identifying with him. There's a psalmist who phrases it like this. Maybe you felt this. Psalm 55, 12 through 14. If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. If a foe were raising himself against me, I could hide from him. But it is you, Peter. It's you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship as we walked with the throng at the house of God. Peter, you were there when we broke the bread and we fed the 5,000. You were there when we walked on water. You won't even identify me. And then Jesus goes and endures the cross. And in that moment, when Jesus is enduring the cross, think about this. His whole life was sacrificed, and still, is Matthew there to help him? No. Is James there to help lift the crossbar? No. Peter's not there. Peter's denied and he's in hiding. And Jesus is there essentially to endure it by himself. And the reason is that the sacrifice has to suffer alone. The sacrifice has to suffer alone. Because the sacrifice is a substitute. When you are sacrificing something on the altar, you don't climb up there with the sacrifice. The sacrifice is the substitute. And so the sacrifice suffers so that we don't have to. We said that Jesus absorbed the payment and the suffering. We don't voluntarily climb up there on the altar and experience what Jesus has been a substitute for. I absorbed it so that you guys no longer have to. Don't discount the suffering that happened when Jesus was sacrificed. Isaiah 53:5, remember, says this, but he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. That person who hurt you, the pain that you feel because of that, Jesus suffered to take that pain so you wouldn't have to. What about the justice that that person deserves because of what they did to you? That's very real, and I am not discounting what was done to you. But Jesus said, my suffering encapsulated that. I took that on myself as well. Don't climb up on the altar. Don't discount the suffering that Jesus went through. And so when we're saying, hey, bring that to God, bring that to Jesus, hey, those wounds, hey, that hurt, bring it to Jesus. And it sounds so simple. First of all, it's simple, but it was not easy. It was the most incredible suffering any human has ever endured. But what does that mean? Here's what it means. The next time you are experiencing that emotional wound, the next time it flares up in your life, the next time you start a new relationship but this old filter comes in, the next time that authority figure speaks and you have the distrust, or the family relationship happens, or your reaction to your mom or your dad or your aunt or your uncle flares up and you feel that wound that is deep inside of you, in that moment you can sit with that. And you say, Jesus, I want to give this to you. I don't want to carry this around. This is too much for me to take. I want to be healed. I don't want to show up in the same place for 38 years and fashion my life around the hurt. I want to give it to you. I don't want to climb up on the altar or discount what you've done. I trust that your suffering is a substitute for this pain that I'm choosing to carry around, and I give it to you. Is it easy? No. Because we have life habits that have been built around our pain. But we need to leave today knowing that God is saying, you can offer this to me and I'll take it. So, this is ending a relationship series. And what's funny is we're ending the series in a starting point. And the starting point is saying this: I have no idea what your relationships are going to look like, neither do you, moving forward. But you got a choice today. You get a choice to ask to be healed. And so the last thing I said was, don't start your journey with a rock in your shoe. Don't start a journey with your rock in your shoe. Don't start a relational journey with pre-existing pain already there, filtering your expectations, tempering what you are really wanting or expecting out of the next relationship. If you're here and you want to be healed, Jesus says, I am ready to heal you. Like an ignorant child, we go on making mud pies in a slum because we cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. Would you pray with me? Lord, pray right now, even for those in the room who are just saying like it can't be that easy. We know it wasn't easy. Jesus, it was just the most difficult payment in human history, but it's finished. It is done. Lord, I pray for those who are carrying broken hearts this morning, that they would be able to receive the compassionate healing of you, our loving Savior. And we claim victory this morning. We do not climb up there on the altar. We thank you for the sacrifice that you made, for the suffering that you endured. And so we claim victory through that substitutional suffering. We claim victory as we learn to love again because of what you've done for us. In your precious name, amen.